Emily Harper had always been the kind of woman who stayed in control. Her quiet apartment, her careful routines, her clean desk at the design firm, everything about her life was neat and predictable. She liked it that way, but that Tuesday evening something shifted. It began with a simple phone call from Daniel Hayes. Daniel wasn't just another client. He was the firm's biggest account holder, a name people whispered with both admiration and envy. He was the kind of man who made people listen when he spoke, calm yet commanding, confident but never arrogant. Emily had been working with him for months on a design project that had stretched longer than expected. Countless late nights, endless edits, and quick coffees in the office lounge had turned professional respect into something that felt different. She didn't call it attraction, not out loud, but there was a certain pull, the kind you felt before you were ready to admit it existed. Her phone rang just as she was about to leave the office. The sound startled her in the quiet, dimly lit workspace. She looked down, saw Daniel's name, and her stomach fluttered for reasons she didn't want to name. She picked up. "Emily," his voice came through, smooth as always. "You free tonight? I owe you dinner after everything you've done for this project." Emily hesitated, staring at the stack of blueprints on her desk. Dinner with a client wasn't unusual, but something in his tone, casual yet somehow personal, made her pause. "Dinner?" she asked softly. "Nothing formal," Daniel said quickly. "Just a meal. My way of saying thanks. There's this place I think you'll like." There was no real reason to say no. Still, her heart thudded as she agreed. "Sure, that sounds nice." After hanging up, she sat still for a few seconds. She told herself it was just dinner. But her reflection in the office window, the small, nervous smile, the faint color in her cheeks, said otherwise. By the time she got home, the sky had turned the soft gray of an Oregon evening. She changed into something simple, jeans, a pale sweater, nothing fancy. She checked her reflection twice, brushing her hair back even though she told herself it didn't matter. Then she drove, rain tapping against her windshield in quiet rhythm. Daniel was waiting by the restaurant's entrance when she arrived. He waved, his familiar warmth making her nerves soften. "You made it," he said with that easy grin. "I was beginning to think I'd scared you off." She laughed lightly, shaking her umbrella. "You're not that scary." Inside, the restaurant was cozy, warm lights, quiet jazz, a few couples talking softly. They were led to a corner booth, where conversation came easily. Daniel was easy to talk to. He asked about her ideas, her dreams, her reasons for choosing design. She found herself laughing more than she expected, telling stories she rarely shared. For the first time in months, Emily forgot about deadlines, clients, and the weight of always being composed. She forgot, even for a moment, that Daniel was her client. He told her about his early career, the years he'd spent building his company from nothing, how it nearly broke him before it finally succeeded. But when he spoke about his life now, there was a trace of weariness in his voice. "Something missing. It's strange," he said quietly. "You can build everything you dreamed of and still feel like something's incomplete." Emily listened, her heart tightening. "Maybe it's because you're always building for others," she said gently. "You forget to build something for yourself." He looked at her, surprised, then smiled. "You sound like you've been there." "Maybe I have," she admitted. "You give so much to your work. One day you realize it's all you have." Their eyes met and held, just a second too long. Emily quickly looked away, pretending to study the candlelight flickering between them. Her pulse was racing. She didn't know why a simple look could make the air feel different. Dinner passed quickly. The waiter brought dessert they shared, laughing as they both admitted they were too full but curious. Time slipped by until the restaurant was nearly empty. When they finally stepped outside, the rain had eased into a mist. Daniel walked her to her car, his hands tucked in his coat pockets. "You know," he said quietly, "I haven't enjoyed an evening like this in a long time." "Me neither," she replied before she could stop herself. For a moment, silence stretched between them, not awkward but heavy with something unspoken. Then Daniel smiled faintly. You've done so much for me, Emily. I mean, for the project, he corrected quickly. But still, you've gone above and beyond. I'd like to return the favor properly. My wife and I host small dinners for people we work closely with. You should come by sometime. Emily froze at that single word. Wife. It hit her like a soft, cold wave. He had never mentioned her before. No ring, no hint, no photos. She masked her surprise with a polite smile. That sounds lovely, she said quietly. Daniel nodded. I'll text you the details soon. They exchanged a final smile before she got into her car. But when she pulled away, her reflection in the rearview mirror looked different, thoughtful, conflicted. She should have been happy the evening went well, that her client respected her enough to include her in something personal. Yet all she felt was a hollow ache in her chest. The word wife kept echoing in her mind. She had no right to feel disappointed, she told herself. He was kind, charming, intelligent. Of course he had someone. Why had she assumed otherwise? The rain grew heavier as she drove home. Streetlights blurred through the windshield like streaks of gold. Emily gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to steady the mess of feelings swirling inside her. She reminded herself it was just dinner, a friendly gesture, nothing more. But when she reached her apartment and sat alone in the quiet, she couldn't stop replaying his words, his smile, the way his eyes had softened when he spoke about feeling incomplete. Something inside her whispered that there was more to his story, and that, somehow, she was already a part of it. Emily pushed that thought away, telling herself to be smart, to stay professional. Still, as she turned off the lights and lay awake that night, she couldn't help but wonder what kind of woman his wife was, and why. For reasons she didn't understand, she suddenly wanted to meet her. It was supposed to be just dinner, but in her heart, Emily already knew the story had only just begun. The days after that dinner moved faster than Emily expected. She threw herself into work, trying to bury the quiet storm Daniel had stirred in her, yet every time her phone buzzed, a part of her hoped it was him. She hated that hope, but it was there. Then 3 days later it happened. A message from Daniel. Dinner at our place this Saturday. My wife Claire would love to meet you. 7 p.m. I'll text the address. Emily read the message twice, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of her wanted to politely decline, to stay on safe, professional ground. But curiosity won. She typed back, Thank you, Daniel. I'll be there. Saturday came quickly. The morning rain had cleared, leaving Portland cool and crisp under a soft autumn sky. Emily spent the day pretending she wasn't nervous. It was just dinner, she told herself again. But deep down, she knew this evening would test something in her heart. She drove to the address Daniel sent, a quiet neighborhood lined with maple trees and tidy lawns. His house was beautiful. Warm light glowing through the windows, laughter faintly drifting out as she walked up the steps. She took a deep breath, rang the bell, and waited. The door opened, but it wasn't Daniel who stood there. It was Claire. She was nothing like Emily expected. Claire wasn't polished or distant. She was warm, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who smiled with her eyes before her lips. You must be Emily, she said, her tone kind. Daniel's told me so much about you. Come in. Emily stepped inside, her pulse racing. The house smelled of roasted herbs and candles, cozy but elegant. A faint piano track played in the background. Daniel appeared from the kitchen, drying his hands. Emily, you made it, he said, smiling easily, as though nothing about this situation should feel strange. Dinner was set in the dining room, simple but beautiful, clearly Claire's touch. Emily noticed how Daniel pulled out a chair for his wife before taking his own, how he poured her wine first. Every small gesture was natural, practiced. For a moment, Emily felt foolish. Whatever she had thought she sensed between them, it was only in her mind. As they ate, Claire asked about Emily's work. She was curious, genuine, not the least bit defensive or jealous. Daniel's been so impressed by you, she said warmly. He said you're one of the most creative people he's met. Emily smiled awkwardly, her cheeks warming. He's been too kind. I just try to keep up with his high standards. Daniel laughed softly. You do more than that. For a while, the three of them talked easily, about design, travel, life. Claire told stories about how Daniel used to work late into the night during the company's early years, how she would bring him coffee just to make sure he remembered to eat. There was love in her words, but also a tiredness, like someone who had lived through too many lonely nights. At one point, Claire stood to bring dessert. When she left the room, Daniel's expression changed slightly. Softer, quieter. He leaned toward Emily, his voice low. "Thank you for coming. It means more than you think." Emily looked at him, unsure how to respond. There was sincerity in his eyes, maybe even sadness. Before she could say anything, Claire returned with a plate of homemade pie, smiling as though nothing had passed between them. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Claire poured coffee while Daniel picked up an old photo frame from the shelf. Him and Claire from years ago, younger, brighter, standing in front of a small bookstore. "That's where we met," he said, smiling faintly. "Daniel came in looking for a book on architecture," Claire said with a laugh. "He walked out with my number instead." They both laughed, and Emily forced a smile, but something about the scene pierced her. They were a couple built on history, maybe cracked in places but still standing. And yet, every time Daniel looked at her, it felt like there was a conversation happening silently between them, one neither dared to start. As the evening drew to an end, Claire insisted on walking Emily to the door. "It was so lovely to finally meet you," she said, her smile genuine. "I hope we'll see you again soon. Daniel's always talking about how much he values your insight." Emily thanked her, but as she stepped onto the porch, she caught Daniel's reflection through the window. He was watching her go, not the polite glance of a host, but something longer, heavier. Their eyes met briefly through the glass before she turned away. The drive home was quiet, the city glowing with streetlights and wet pavement. Emily's thoughts were tangled. She should have felt relieved. Meeting his wife should have ended whatever confusion lingered in her mind. But instead, it made everything worse. Claire was kind, gracious. The kind of woman who didn't deserve a husband who seemed distracted by another woman's presence. Still, Emily couldn't deny what she'd seen. A sadness in Daniel's eyes when he spoke of his life. A hint of loneliness that didn't fit with the picture-perfect home he lived in. She tried to reason with herself. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe she was imagining things. But that small, dangerous part of her heart whispered something else. Maybe he's not as happy as he looks. When she reached home, she sat in the car for a long time, watching the rain slide down the glass. Her reflection stared back at her, tired, unsure, but alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. She hated that she felt drawn to him. Hated it even more that a part of her wondered if he felt it too. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't sleep. Her phone buzzed once, a message. "Thank you again for coming tonight. It meant a lot to both of us." Emily read it twice. The words were harmless, polite, but she could feel something underneath them. Something that shouldn't have been there. She typed a reply, then deleted it. Wrote again, deleted again. Finally, she sent only 2 words. "Good night." Then she turned off her phone and lay in the dark, listening to the sound of distant rain. She didn't know what she was waiting for, but deep down she knew this wasn't over. Dinner had only opened a door. Neither of them was ready to close. Days turned into weeks, and Emily tried to return to normal. But ever since that night at Daniel's house, she couldn't stop thinking about him, or his wife. The way Claire had smiled so genuinely, the way Daniel's eyes had followed Emily as she left, it all tangled inside her like a knot she couldn't loosen. She knew it was wrong to think about him, but emotions didn't follow rules. They crept in quietly and stayed where logic couldn't reach. At the office, Daniel's calls became more frequent. They still discussed work, but their conversations felt different now. Softer, more personal. He asked how her week was going, if she was sleeping enough, if she was still visiting the small coffee shop she'd mentioned during dinner. It wasn't flirting, not openly, but the tone carried something underneath it, something they both noticed but didn't name. One evening, he stopped by the office after hours. Most of the team had already gone home. Emily was alone, reviewing final designs on her computer. The sound of footsteps made her look up. Daniel stood at the door holding 2 coffees. "I figured you'd still be here," he said with a faint smile. "You work harder than anyone I know," she smiled back, trying to steady her voice. "That's one way to say I don't have a life." He chuckled, setting 1 cup on her desk. "You should. You deserve more than just work." Their eyes met for a moment too long. Emily looked away, pretending to study a draft on the screen. "So do you," she said quietly. He leaned against the desk, his tone softer now. "Maybe. But I'm not sure I'd know what to do with it anymore." The words lingered in the air, carrying a kind of sadness that made Emily's chest tighten. She wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his expression told her not to. Instead, she took a sip of coffee, grateful for the distraction. They worked side by side for a while, the silence between them strangely comfortable. When she finally shut down her computer, the office lights dimmed, and only the city's glow filled the room. "You should get home," she said gently. Daniel smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Home," he repeated almost to himself. Then, after a pause, he added, "Sometimes I think people can live in the same house and still be miles apart." Emily didn't answer. She knew what he was saying without him having to explain. The sadness in his voice was the same one she'd felt in her own life too often. The kind that came from doing everything right and still feeling incomplete. When he finally left that night, Emily sat in silence, staring at the city lights through the window. She told herself to stop this before it became something real, but deep down, she knew something had already changed. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's visits became routine. A quick stop after a meeting, a shared coffee, a long talk about everything except the one thing they both felt growing between them. Emily tried to remind herself that he was married, that Claire didn't deserve betrayal, but the heart rarely listened to reason. Then one evening, Claire called. Emily was surprised. She hadn't expected to ever hear from her again. "Emily, it's Claire Hayes," the voice on the other end said warmly. "Daniel mentioned you were helping him finalize the presentation next week. I was wondering if you'd like to come by again. Maybe dinner this Friday? We owe you one for helping him so much." Emily hesitated. Every instinct told her to say no, but she couldn't find the words. Claire sounded so genuine, so unaware of the tension that had quietly taken shape between them. "Of course," Emily finally said. "That's very kind of you." Friday came too soon. Emily almost canceled twice but couldn't bring herself to do it. She arrived with a small gift, a bottle of wine, and forced a smile when Claire opened the door. Inside, Daniel looked surprised to see her. His expression flickered for just a second before he smiled. The dinner felt different this time. Claire seemed distracted, mentioning she'd been traveling for work more lately. "Daniel's been handling things alone a lot," she said casually, unaware of how those words twisted inside Emily. As the evening went on, Claire received a call and stepped out of the room. The house fell quiet. Daniel and Emily sat at the dining table, a single candle flickering between them. "I didn't know she'd invite you," he said, his voice low. "She's kind," Emily replied softly. "She just wanted to thank me." Daniel gave a small, sad laugh. "She's always kind. That's the hardest part." The honesty in his voice cut through the room. Emily looked at him, her heart racing. "Daniel, this isn't right," she said finally. He nodded, not arguing, just looking at her like he'd already had the same thought 1,000 times. "I know," he said, "but I also know that some people come into your life and make you realize what you've been missing." Before she could respond, Claire's voice echoed from the hallway. "I'm sorry about that work call." Emily straightened, her hands shaking slightly. The conversation ended there, sealed beneath a silence both of them understood. When the evening ended, Claire hugged her at the door. "You should come by again soon," she said with a smile. "Daniel always says how much brighter the office feels when you're around." Emily forced a smile, her throat tight. "He's a great boss," she said softly. As she walked to her car, Daniel followed her out. The night air was cold, and the sky was heavy with clouds. He stopped beside her car, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry for tonight. I shouldn't have said what I did." Emily looked at him, her heart torn. "You didn't say anything wrong," she replied. "But maybe that's what makes it worse." He nodded, eyes full of something between regret and longing. "Good night, Emily," he said quietly. She drove off without looking back, but tears stung her eyes as the house disappeared behind her. She didn't understand how something so gentle could feel so heavy. It wasn't an affair. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was a dangerous closeness, the kind that made the heart forget what was right. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Claire's smile, Daniel's expression, the flicker of the candlelight between them. She wanted to stop thinking about him, but every attempt to shut her mind only pulled her closer to the memory of his voice. Emily knew one thing now. Whatever was happening between them, it couldn't stay hidden forever. And when the truth finally came out, someone would be hurt. She just didn't know who. The following week felt heavy, like every hour carried unspoken words. Emily avoided Daniel as best as she could. She kept her emails short, her conversations brief, her voice professional. Yet even distance couldn't erase what lingered in the space between them. Every time she saw him, every time their eyes met in a meeting, it was there, a quiet ache, a reminder of a connection neither of them had chosen, but both had felt. One Friday afternoon, Daniel called her into his office. The blinds were open, sunlight spilling across his desk. "Close the door, please," he said softly. His voice wasn't stern. It was tired. Emily did as he asked, her heart already uneasy. "I've accepted a transfer," Daniel said after a long silence. "I'll be moving to the Chicago branch next month." The words hit her harder than she expected. "You're leaving?" she asked, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. He nodded. "It's for the best. For everyone." Emily didn't know what to say. The part of her that wanted to be strong understood his decision. But another part, smaller, quieter, felt like something was being taken away before it ever had a chance to begin. "I just wanted to thank you," Daniel continued, "for everything. You've been one of the best people I've ever worked with, and maybe," he hesitated, eyes searching hers, "maybe one of the best people I've ever met." Her chest tightened. "Daniel," but before she could finish, someone knocked. The door opened slightly and Claire stepped in, holding a takeout bag. "Surprise," she said with a smile. "I thought I'd bring you lunch before your big meeting." Emily froze. The air shifted instantly. Claire's eyes moved between them, reading something she couldn't quite name but could almost feel. "Oh, I didn't realize you were in a meeting," she said quickly. Daniel stood, his face calm but his tone careful. "It's fine, Claire. We were just finishing up." Emily stepped back, her voice shaky but polite. "I was just leaving. Thank you for letting me know about the transfer, Daniel. I'll prepare the transition files." Claire smiled faintly, but her gaze lingered on Emily for a moment too long. "You've been such a big help to him," she said softly. "He talks about you all the time." Emily forced a smile. "He's a great mentor. It's been a pleasure working with him." Then she slipped past Claire, her pulse racing. Back at her desk, she sat in silence. For the first time, she didn't know whether to feel relief or heartbreak. Maybe this was how stories like theirs were meant to end. Not with grand gestures or promises, but with quiet goodbyes and lessons that stayed long after. That night, rain began to fall. Emily stayed late again, finishing reports in the dim office light. She was about to leave when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, and there he was. "You're still here," Daniel said gently. "So are you," she replied, smiling faintly. He walked closer, setting his briefcase down. "Claire knows," he said quietly. "Not everything, but she noticed. She's not angry, just hurt. And that's worse." Emily's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry," he shook his head. "It's not your fault. It's mine. I let the line blur. I should have been stronger." Silence filled the room again, thick and painful. The rain outside hit the windows harder now, as if echoing everything they couldn't say. "I loved being around you," he admitted finally, his voice low. You reminded me of a part of myself I'd forgotten. But that doesn't mean I should have let you carry that with me. Emily swallowed hard, her eyes glassy. Maybe we were both just trying to fix something that was already broken. He smiled sadly. Maybe. They stood there for a moment, both knowing it was the last time. No touch, no promise, just two people standing in the ruins of something that never truly began. When Emily finally left, she didn't look back. The city lights blurred through the rain as she drove home, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. But it wasn't just sadness, it was clarity. She had felt something real, even if it was fleeting. And maybe that was enough. Weeks passed. The office adjusted quickly to the news of Daniel's transfer. His replacement arrived, and life moved forward, as it always did. Emily stayed quiet, focused, determined to heal. Then one day, she received an envelope in her office mailbox. No name on the front, just a return address from Chicago. Inside was a handwritten note. Emily, I wanted to say thank you. Not for what happened between us, but for reminding me of who I still could be. Claire and I are working things out. It's not easy, but it's honest now. You deserve someone who can give you everything, not someone who's still learning how. Take care, Daniel. She read the letter twice, her hands trembling slightly. Then she folded it neatly and placed it in her drawer. There were no tears this time, just a strange calm, the kind that comes when a storm finally ends. Months later, Emily stood outside that same coffee shop she used to mention to him. She ordered her usual drink and found a seat by the window. The city moved around her, busy, loud, alive. She smiled to herself, realizing she was finally free of what had once weighed her down. Maybe Daniel had been a chapter, not the story. And maybe life wasn't about finding someone to complete you, but learning that you were already whole. As the sun began to set, Emily looked out at the glowing skyline and whispered softly to herself, I hope he's okay, somewhere in Chicago. Maybe Daniel was thinking the same. Their paths had crossed at the wrong time. Under the wrong stars, but in the right way. Because sometimes, even the wrong people teach you the right lessons. And that was love too, in its own quiet form. And with that thought, Emily picked up her coffee, took a slow sip, and smiled at the evening ahead. The story ended not with heartbreak, but with peace. Two people who once reached for each other and instead found themselves. Because life, after all, isn't always about staying. It's about learning when to let go.